This one is another one of my war stories. I got lots of war stories. One of the things about it is just about every mechanic out there that's worked very long has got war stories, but I usually keep up with the details on my war stories, and I take pictures and stuff. And this particular one, you can pick it outside the book in the box, is as important as knowing when to use them. Now, if you try to wing everything, if you try to never use Identifix or all that or any shop manual, and you're just going to open the hood and start working on something, about 7 times out of 10 you're going to make a mess, or you're going to be blindsided by something. One example was when this guy here was going to pull an engine out of a Kia Sportage, and he said, well, I know how to pull an engine out. So he started pulling the engine loose. He got the engine took loose from the transmission, and when he took loose, he found out that there was not enough room to take the engine out with the transmission in there, so he had to bolt them back together and pull the whole thing out as a unit, which is what you were supposed to do anyway. If he'd have looked that up, he'd have been okay. But I don't know how many times I'll tell somebody, go over here and do this job, and they just want to tear into it and start throwing stuff everywhere and see what they can figure out, and then they wind up making a mess. But there's times whenever you can basically find mistakes in the book, like on some of them. I have seen all that in a place where somebody typoed something in it, or they may have even got it from the manufacturer, an early version, and it said it was 114 inch-pounds, and it will say 114 foot-pounds, and it'll be a really small boat, but that doesn't happen a lot. But whenever a repair shop asked me for a freshly trained technician, and a guy called me this morning and said he needs somebody really bad, he said, I got 11 cars in the shop, I got 10 more out there waiting to work on, I don't have enough help. He said, I need some help, I need somebody to work. I said, and they do all kinds of work here. But anyway, I usually ask what kind of shop manual or database resources the shop has. What do you got? What are you going to have them working out of? One time I put somebody to work at a used car lot, and he was wanting the guy to fix everything with baling wire and duct tape with no shop manual and no nothing. Didn't take very long to get burned out on a job like that. Well, anybody's got to have shop manual data on hand in the form of facts, figures, wire maps, TSBs, system descriptions. Identifix is good too, and ITN is good if you remember that. In addition to the shop manual data, we need the tools and the know-how to get the information. Just part of the deal. You got to be able to gather it. Got to be able to sort out and interpret the data we gather in order to make a dependable judgment. Now, in the olden days, if one guy at a shop ran into something he hadn't seen before, most of the mechanics that I knew growing up were really self-reliant, and they didn't really want to ask anybody else for help. They wanted to figure it out on their own. So they wouldn't typically call another shop. Then I would wound up at the Ford place, and I would get calls from shops trying to, get information on what they needed to do. And I'd say, have you checked the fuel pressure? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, what was it? And they wouldn't know. And I'd say, you hadn't checked the fuel pressure, have you? And they'd say, well, no, not really. And I said, well, go back and check the fuel pressure and call me back. This kind of thing. Now, hard data gathering. You got to get from the vehicle itself. We depend on our diagnostic equipment, our meters, or whatever measuring devices we're using, oscopes. And higher end scan tools have got technical service bulletins, and even some of them have got wire harness pinouts. So if you want to look at the particular sensor pinout, it'll actually pull it up, tell you what color the wires are, which cavity's what, and what you need to find at each cavity. Pretty interesting stuff. A really good handheld oscope will have scope patterns stored in it as well. You can go into a library. Picoscope people, they basically got a waveform library that they encourage you to upload, waveforms with the details about when they were taken and if it was bad or good and all that. Well, this car here had a lot of different drivers, driven by a bunch of different people. Anytime you got a car driven by a lot of different drivers, there's going to be issues that some people are going to notice as a problem and other people won't. There's a record driver named George King that I worked with. He's passed away now. It's been eons ago. And he came in there and he says the airbag, he said the airbag light flashes on this car. And I says, well, did you count the flashes? Because that's going to tell me what's wrong, because it doesn't store codes. It just flashes the code when there's something going on. I said, George, you need to count those codes and let me know what you see the next time you're driving. But I could never get it to act up. And he said, I thought he understood that, but the next time he came in there, he goes, all right, it happened again. I said, all right, what did you see? He says, well, it come on, and then it blinked 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times. You're not doing me any good, George. 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 is not helping me, because that's a lot of different codes, All right, now, this one here, got a parasitic drain maybe? Battery was going dead on it. and somebody had already put a new battery in it. I'll mention that a little bit later. But you know how your batteries going through your fuse box, going from the generator back in, usually through a fuse, a big fuse, to the starter, and then you got all these loads over here. And we talked about a parasitic drain before. One of these loads right here, if it's caught, you know, some of these, a bunch of those, I've only got 6 here of various different kinds, but any of these loads that happen to be trickling a little juice through there, you know, can pull enough juice out of there. You're basically going to find out how much it is. So we charge it just, well, since the battery had been replaced, the charging system test showed the generator output at about 85 amps idling because the battery was good, but it was weak. So it was picking up lower voltage than its target. The voltage regulator, which is an external one on this old Taurus here, was basically jacking the field up so that it was getting lots and lots of juice there. And there weren't any lights or electric motors running anywhere with the key off, and the battery cables were clean and tight. The ones you really like is the ones you set down in a sort of a shady place and you happen to look in there and you see the glove box lights burning. And you sort of find it just looking, or you hear a motor running. You know what I mean? Then you say, aha, that's what's killing it. You don't always have that. All right, so in this particular case, the receptionist reported it had been jumped off twice, but the battery kept going dead. This is an actual picture of the car with the test light installed between the negative battery terminal and the post. And somebody had popped a new battery in it, but it went just as dead as the original. A lot of times that happens. Somebody said, well, I changed out the battery and it went dead. Adam was telling me about this guy that he knew that was an aircraft mechanic, and I don't have anything against aircraft mechanics, but he said when the guy started having trouble with his car, the only thing he knew how to do was have the alternator tested and replace or clean the battery terminals. Briefly touching the battery terminal of the post, see if you actually see a light like this, what you need to do is without moving that light, you need to touch that for a second to charge up whatever needs to charge it up and release it to see if that light comes back. Because sometimes you may see that light pulsing or something like that, and when you touch a battery terminal to it and charge up what's trying to charge up through the bulb, that light will go off and stay off. So you may find out you don't even have a drain. Well, that didn't happen here. So what's an acceptable amount of draw on a modern vehicle? Somebody give me a number.
0.0201, not very much at all.
That's it. He's making it up as he goes.
It's not, it's, yeah,
105.
but it's not
Huh?
like
105.
Yeah, it's actually 50 milliamps.
So
50 milliamps.
105.
Here we go. See? Which is what you said. I wasn't saying you were wrong. 0.050, 50 milliamps. 0.500 is 500 milliamps, and 1.00. See the numbers? 1,000, 550. See how those work? All right. Now, when you hook your meter up between here and here, greater than 50 milliamps is too much. I had worked on a cutaway one time that was belonged to this woman that did art. Well, she was an artist of some kind that did some kind of art. I don't know what kind of art she did at the time. But there was the coil on a relay that was energized, and the relay wasn't even pulling anything at the time. But that one coil on that relay would kill that battery in 2 days. I mean, in 2 days it killed battery. And when I got it fixed, she gave me a piece of art. And it was a piece of board out of an old house that was cut in the shape of a fish that had scales on it that were made out of tin that she had cut out with a tin snip, and the eye was Coke bottle caps. And I gave it to my aunt, and she's hung it in her house somewhere. She still got it. But anyway, on late model cars, you connect the meter, and if a draw is present, you walk away for 30 to 40 minutes, and then return to see if the measured draw goes away. Now you can also use the inductive gauge I gave you the other day, the inductive meter. You can use an inductive meter. That way you haven't broken the connection and made it where everything's got to recharge. So that's the smart way to do it. But in this particular case, we didn't do it that way. But there was a Mustang that pulled up out here one day that belonged to the lady that's the PR person for the college, and she was having issues. And when I hooked up to hers, it was a 2010 model, and it had quite a bit of draw. And so whenever I saw all that draw, I walked away and came back an hour later, and all the draw was gone, and everything was still hooked up. And she had a bad battery, is what her problem was. She had a real weak battery. But basically, her perception of that one was that it would go dead overnight, but the battery was actually killing itself. And that's possible. If you take the battery cable off and the battery still goes dead overnight, the battery's killing itself, and it's possible for it to do that on the inside. It can have something wrong with it. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can. Now, when we connected a meter to this one, the draw that it had was more than the meter could handle. That's why we used the test light. We had more than 10 amps. It actually maxed out the meter, and it was like if you left the meter hooked up, it burned the meter up because it had too much. Remember, these little meters, most of them, even the nice fluke meters, it's got that $10 fuse in them. They won't handle but about 10 amps, and then that fuse opens up, then you got to go spend another $10.
That's like a motor or something.
Huh?
That sounds like you got a motor or something.
Sounds like it, doesn't it? An inductive clamp meter or an O-scope works too. All right, now the first stop, that's the voltage regulator. This one had an external regulator. We disconnected the voltage regulator and the large alternator terminal. That's the first thing that I do when I've got a pretty good sized draw. And here recently, not very long ago, we had one, and I don't remember if any of you guys were a part of that scenario, but we found a draw when we disconnected the big terminal off the alternator, the draw went away. Remember that? Anybody in on that deal? It was about 2 months ago, huh?
What was it on?
I don't remember, but I remember the alternator was easy to get to and it was right on top. And I said, before we go chasing all this. No, it wasn't. It was sitting right here. It was a car, but I don't remember what it was. I don't even remember which kind. But anyway, if it's got diodes that are bad in it, it can make it do it. On some of your older Chevrolets, you know, like a 69, 70 Chevrolet, whatever, if you switched off the car and the alternator light came on and stayed on, it typically meant you had a bad positive diode in the alternator. I mean, strange things can happen, you know, when currents are affected. Neither one of these disconnections, when we unhook the regulator and when we unhook the alternator, neither one of them kill the light. Now, even after everybody else went with internal regulators, the Taurus's in '86 came out with an external regulator and 100 amp alternator because it had a heated windshield on it. You know what I mean? Heated windshield. Like if you had a totally froze up windshield, you could kick that heated windshield in and all of that snow or frost would be gone within 2 minutes. So the engine had to be running, huh?
What does that have to do with the external regulator?
Well, the only 100 amp alternator they had at the time was one that used an external regulator. They didn't have an internal regulator 100. Now they did after that not long, but anyway. Now we took the other legs out of the circuit, we opened it up, the PDC cover, I found it when we pulled one 60 amp maxi fuse that eliminated the draw, and it was time to see what that fuse was feeding, you know? Remember what we said, you pull the big fuse, you find the big one that's killing, and then it feeds a bunch of smaller legs, and then you go to the ones that it feeds and only those, and then you'll narrow it down. You're basically doing that like drawing straws. Well, a quick look at page 1322 showed circuit 38 fed the headlamp switch. There's the headlamp switch. Incidentally, for future reference, since this is an electrical class, that little circuit breaker that's built into the headlamp switch can go bad and start making the lights flash off and on going down the road. And when you see that, if you look at your schematic and it shows that circuit breaker in the headlamp switch, that's what it is. Anyway, this is where we are. See, here's the zoom in of what we're looking at over there. Now you notice that little broken wire, you remember that? What does that broken wiring track mean? You see these other ones aren't broken. That one is, but this one right here is broken between there and there. What does that mean?
Doesn't it also mean it goes somewhere else?
Yeah, it doesn't just go here, it goes other places. Now that headlamp fuse is the one we pulled. All right, so the headlamps weren't on, but I wondered if the headlamp switch had a melted connector. That happens on these vehicles. It'll actually, sometimes it'll cook the connector, cook the headlight switch. One time there was this lady came in with a Jeep, and she was traveling. And it was one of these headlamp switches, you know, in the dash, like you pull the knob out, you know, the one you push the button and pull the little stem out of it. And it had burned up the headlamp connector. And we didn't have one, and she was on the road. But I fixed it. And when I got through fixing it, you couldn't tell that it wasn't factory, and it worked just as good as it ever did. So what I did was, I got a headlamp switch for a Ford, and I got the connector pigtail for a Ford, and I figured out which wires went where, and I put a Ford headlight switch in that Jeep, and it was just like it, screwed right in there, everything worked fine. Had to solder the wires and put them all in, figure out which wires went where, because it was different. But whenever she drove out of there, she was happy, and I think it only cost her $23 or something for the parts plus the labor that was in it. But anyway, this is what it would have looked like. The Taurus did not show such damage as this, so we went to look somewhere else. Okay, the C101 connector, which was right here, followed the harness from the power distribution center to the C101 connector, which was right there. And you can see it pointing in there, the driver's side shock tower. And when I went to disconnected it, I found the draw went away. So we lost our draw when I disconnected that connector right there. calling me. Anyway, I'll talk to her later. This puts a problem between the C101 connector and the underside of the dash. All right. The C101 connector, and that's what it looked like, had two black-orange wires in tandem that led me to find the more complete schematic. Right? Okay, so basically this is where I was, right? So when I had unplugged this, I lost the draw. When I unplugged that, I lost the draw. That's interesting, isn't it? Flipping back through the PDC, I came to another page that also pictured the 60 amp lamp fuse, but there was a big difference. This one showed the splice that the previous schematic didn't, with one fork going to the headlamp switch and the other fork both going through C101, going to feed several smaller fuses. Now, a lot of times, if you see a module, it's got two wires coming out there that are the same size, big wires going to the same place. It's because there's enough current that they wanted to divide it between two circuits so that it wouldn't burn up. You know, that's usually how that goes. But anyway, this is the way it flows right here. The C101 connector in circuit 38. See, your circuit numbers, keep up with your circuit numbers because that's important when you're going from schematic to schematic. And this is the way it went. It went down here and it went through that. When we pull that circuit breaker right there, we wound up losing our draw. So we had basically seen what I was telling you before. This one here was feeding all of these. And when I pulled all of these, the only one of them that killed the draw was the one that was leading to the problem. Got any idea what it was? What does circuit 40 feed? That's what we're looking for there. That's it, LBW. That does not stand for what you think it stands for, light blue, white, okay? All right, here we go. Circuit 40 feeds the lighter. See there's circuit 40? And there's your cigar lighter. What is this symbol right here? It's a heater. Even when you're seeing an oxygen sensor heater, you're gonna see that a lot of the time. That's a heater. And that's in the ashtray assembly. We had a penny in the cigarette lighter. All of that work, and it turned out being a penny in the cigarette lighter. Wasn't that great fun? You like that?
I heard that before.
Yeah, I've seen it a zillion times. But
They would only blow the fuse that feeds the.
But on this one, it was fed by a circuit breaker.
Right.
You see what I mean? And instead of the circuit breaker would just keep going, and it had a big draw. It was just pulling the battery all the way down to nothing. But the cigarette lighter on that one's not all the time. Cigarette lighter elements can short out too. I've seen cigar lighters short out and cause that. The actual cigarette lighter itself short out and cause issues. You know, because people keep lighting cigarettes with it, and over time it oxidizes and it gets all, you know, that kind of thing. Well, more common than it might seem, when the lighter or power pointer near a pocket or ashtray where change is kept, it's easy for a coin to fall in and cause a short. Because people will have that lighter out there, maybe charging their phone or something, they'll keep throwing coins in there. If you've noticed, on most of the cars now, they've taken that out of there. I mean, they moved the, you know, any place where you might put coins away from the lighter, you know, so, I mean, that's not on every vehicle, but the smart folks have. Now, shop manuals are hard to write and are not error-free. When we stumble across an error, which we didn't this time, the only error we made was, you know, not chasing this other leg, that circuit. A little wiring schematic error can lead to hours of unnecessary labor. One time the shop foreman and this guy that was, you know, when I was working at the Ford place, they would send us, we didn't have our shop manuals on computer back then. We basically had them in, they would send us volumes of books and all that we had to keep up there in a library. And then they would send these little orange stickers that said you go to this particular shop manual and this particular page and stick this sticker on there, and it'll take you to another book where the wire harness, where a wire color's been corrected or the schematic's drawn different or whatever. The orange sticker, bright orange. And whenever I didn't have anything to do, peanut festival's in town and there's not a lot of work if I'm caught up, I did not use that for the opportunity to plant my butt in a chair in the air conditioning and fold my arms, okay? I actually was always working. I was always fixing battery chargers. I was always mounting fins. I was always doing something. And that's one of the reasons they paid me as well as they did, because they knew that I was working even when I was waiting on parts. I was working. I was always going to be working. I did not sit around with my feet propped up. Now, some of the other guys did, but I didn't. All right, so the long and the short of it is the shop foreman and one of these guys that was working on this Ford Probe and couldn't figure out why the air conditioner wouldn't work right. And it had them up against the wall, and it was working them over. And they were, you know, taking it on the chin, and they had worked on this thing for half a day trying to figure out what to do with it, scratching their heads, and they call me over there. You know, shop foreman ran out of ideas on something electrical, he'd call me over there. So I come over there, and as soon as we open the book, the orange sticker is looking you right in the face. And it says, go to this little TSB book and open up to this page and you'll find a more accurate wiring schematic. And I says, do you guys see this sticker that I busted my fanny up there putting on all these books and you did not even, so I said, let me go get this book. So I went and got the little TSB book and opened it up. Look, you notice how this wiring schematic is totally different from the one you're looking at? That's because this one is a bad schematic. That's why they had me put this sticker on the page. And in 3 minutes, looking at the right wiring schematic, we found the problem. You know what I mean? And that was, they just plumb felt silly. Well, I mean, these guys here were, their hair was standing up, their eyes were burning, they were just having a terrible time. It was hot in the shop that day. Well, I like to blame the shop manual this time around. I realized that there was something I'd overlooked when I was studying. So much for blaming the book. You can't always blame the book. Sometimes you got to take responsibility and say, I broke the starter. Okay? This was good.
I did it.
All right. Test question 1. Get ready. Get your pencils. Conventional theory says current flows how? A, B, C, or D. From negative to positive, positive to negative, from the load to the ground, from the ground to the switch. Don't say it out loud, just write your answer down. We will grade this test. Do it now. We're grading the test. We have time. All right. Technician A says a scan tool gives first-hand, real-time information about what's happening on a PCM monitored or controlled circuit. Technician B says since he has learned how to use his scan tool and interpret readings, he no longer needs a digital voltmeter or oscilloscope. Now, what I'm talking about there is your best source of information about what's going on a circuit what you see on the scan tool screen? Is it possible to see something on the scan tool screen that is not real? So in a situation like that, the smartest thing to do is go to that circuit live to that wire with a scope or a meter or something and find out what you're really seeing right there. If the scan tool's telling you one thing but your meter's telling you something else, the meter's what you pay attention to. I almost gave you the answer to that one, so you better not get that one wrong, okay? All right, the customer's concern is that the battery on his 97 Jeep Grand Cherokee was dead when he came back from a 3-week trip. Technician A says this may be due to a normal draw. Technician B says the ignition off draw fuse should have been removed by the customer to prevent the dead battery concern.
Hold on a second, let me read it again.
3-week trip, comes home, battery's dead. Why did my battery die? I was gone for 3 weeks. Of course, he just parked the truck in the garage and went on his other one or whatever else on the plane. Could this be due to a normal draw? Yes or no? The ignition off draw fuse, incidentally, the ignition off draw fuse is, if you look in the fuse panel on some of these that have that, it says IOD. If you see IOD, that's what that stands for, okay?
So basically what it's doing is...
Whenever you've got some of these vehicles in storage, there are some, even on some of the foreign vehicles, there's some of them will have a couple of fuses that are mounted in a little yellow holder, and when you pull it, it'll snap out of there and open some circuits, and it basically feeds the radio. If they're shipping them from overseas, they'll have that undone. On the Eagle medallions that we used to, back in the 80s, we were supposed to take a jumper out and take a relay out and replace it with a jumper. And so that was part of the deal on that. Test question number 4, an 86 Chevrolet pickup consistently runs low on coolant. Technician A says it may have a bad radiator cap. Technician B says it may need head gaskets.
Low on coolant?
We haven't said anything about whether or not he's seeing coolant. We just know that he keeps having to add it. Can a radiator cap cause it to go low? Can a head gasket cause it to go low? If you answer that one wrong, slap yourself. All right. Got it. Time to move on. Next question number 5. The customer's concern is that his instrument panel lights come on whenever he applies the brakes, even with the headlamps and parking lamps off. Technician A says the concern must be a shorted wire harness. Technician B says one of the stop tail lamp bulbs might be faulty. That's question number 6. Technician A says a totally dead car battery can be connected to a charger backwards and it can actually receive a backwards charge. Technician B says the battery can be low on cold cranking amps and in need of replacement, even if it still starts the vehicle just fine. You answering questions over there? All of the following can cause a no crank condition except what? Now this is a perfect example of an ASE question. An ASE test question, if you take your electrical, is going to look like this. A lot of them. Now they have technician A and B questions too, but that is a perfect example. Ready? All right. Did I actually put 2 questions in there, the same one? I think I did. So, let's move on to 8. Which of the following tools should be used during every vehicle battery service operation? That ain't hard. And I'm always preaching about this. Ain't that right? Do you always wear it? I always do. Saw a couple of women out there at Walmart trying to jump a car off. This is a dangerous thing. 2 women trying to jump a car off at Walmart.
That's dangerous.
With all due respect to women, these 2 women didn't have a clue what they were doing, and I could tell. And I looked, and it was a Crown Victoria, an older one, like an 88 model, and the alternator had been replaced, and the battery terminal was mounted so that the positive one was over there close to the fender, and every time the battery jiggled around, because it wasn't tied down, that thing would bump against the fender. So somebody had put some rubber in between there to try to stop that, and it kept chipped its way through the rubber. That's what was killing her battery. It kept touching the ground, right? And so I said, let me get this thing handled before you girls kill yourself. So they were older ladies, you know. I mean, it's not like they were young and good looking, with all due respect. I just stopped to help them because I was concerned. And I said, okay, let me do something else to keep you from having any more trouble, since you've already had an alternator, you got a new battery, and you got that rubber in between the battery. So I loosened the battery terminal up and turned it so it couldn't touch. That's all I had to do. And we jumped it off, and it was good to go. You know what I mean? I mean, that's all that was her whole problem, was it kept bumping against her. But see, the thing about it is, if you see that the battery terminal is touching, you know, put something in between there is not the right answer. You got to turn it. All I had to do is turn it about 20 degrees so it wouldn't touch, you know. Not that complicated. But it's scary to me to see somebody out here with a, you know, with nothing on their face jumping off a car. Because you don't ever know when that battery's going to go boom.
Have you ever seen one explode?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely, I've seen them explode. I had one blow up in my face, except I happened to have my arm in front of my face when it blew up. And you know the stuff you hear in the military that makes your ears ring? It's about like that. About like a grenade going off right in front of you. Boo! This one guy that I heard me talking about in one of the videos, sent an email. He said he opened the hood on a Jeep, I think it was, and he saw the battery case swelling up, and he just backed away from it, and it went off like a bomb.
What caused them to explode?
Internal shorts makes them start building pressure, or a spark. If they're actually got a, I've seen batteries whenever you turn them to start, they started just fine the last time. You pull them over here, you shut them off, you go to start, and one of the cells just boiling to beat the band. And that explosive gas, not only it's permeating the whole inside of the battery, and then if one spark manages to feed down inside the battery, boom. I was taking her battery terminal off. Last thing I expected. Put my wrench on that thing, turned it one turn, and it goes boom, and all that stuff hit my arm instead of going in here. And at that time, you know, I was 20 years old and thought I was bulletproof like all you guys. And I wasn't wearing safety glasses, of course, because my arm was in front of my face, I still have eyeballs.